a nice concept that a lot of lawyers learn in law school is the bundle of sticks analogy for property rights. So seeing property as a set of things, a collection of rights, and not necessarily just one thing. The bundle of sticks in a smart contract is, maybe the admin right, the mint permissions, the pauser role, the owner of the contract even, who can upgrade and reestablish balances and other sort of very interesting things.
On this episode, we are talking with Ross Campbell, who has done a bunch of different things in the space. He's working on Kali DAO. He's a member of LexDAO. He worked at SushiSwap for a couple of years. He's working on a project called Nani, which is a really interesting intersection of crypto and AI. And so we talk about a ton of different things around legal.
We talked about the Keep tokenized multi-sig wallet that he's working on.
Yes.
It's pretty wild.
And Ross used to be a lawyer, but he is now a developer. So we really get a fun intersection here of the trad world and the degen world of smart contract development. And so this is a really fun conversation. I feel like I'm walking away with a few things to sort of think about in my mind. But Kevin, I'm curious what you got out of this conversation. What was interesting to you?
This was a banger. I appreciated Ross taking the time to chat with us because he just has a wealth of knowledge across a few different niches that I think all circle the Web3 space that we've all been excited about. And I think he's so deep in the weeds building these on-chain primitives and these like low-level tools that help to enable the thing that helps to enable this long-term vision that he sees in the space. And it was really refreshing to see him go into detail about all of the different things that get him excited.
Yeah, agree. So hopefully you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed recording it.
Absolutely.
Let's get into it. We are here with Ross Campbell. Ross, we're very excited to have you on the show.
Greetings, Ross.
First of all, I will say, I think you do a ton of really interesting things across the space. So I cannot wait to dive into all of them. But maybe before we do that, you can give a little bit of background on you and what got you here, which is, I suppose, on a podcast talking about crypto, all the technical things. What landed you here?
Yeah, sure. I can do the typical crypto rabbit hole, spiel. So I started, peeking out from a law firm called Andrew's Curse. That was about 2018. And at the time I was doing research for the law firm and the clients on data security ransoms. So there are hospitals, law firms themselves were being hacked, and they were having to figure out how to buy Bitcoin to pay off these hackers. So something that was interesting to me was that, this was a sort of like very interesting like example of like economic warfare or like economic attacks, just like from the internet onto sort of what I was doing, sort of what I was building with the law firm. So kind of from that perspective, seeing something that was like almost like an alien, spacecraft. This is very topical this week, of course, just like dropping into my work, into my like, this like, paper empire I was building with the firm was very like, startling to me. So when I saw sort of, these Bitcoin ransoms, started reading a bit about what Vitalik and others were doing with smart contracts and how they wanted to actually automate the whole agreement sphere. I sort of got, intensely curious, consumed as much as I could about sort of the Ethereum project at the time, and then launched myself into the space full-time, quit the firm, did freelance for a little bit, and then luckily I was able to land a gig with the Open Law Project through Consensus. There I was able to sort of join this new sort of hybrid practice called legal engineering. So sort of lawyers, more often with a corporate background, were joining crypto to, study DAOs, but also, think about how you could do sort of like fundraising and more, ordinary transactions using this technology. So Consensus was sort of bringing in sort of people from TradFi like myself and lawyers to work on these very interesting early stage projects. With the Open Law Project, we designed with Amin Soleimani and Metacartel the Moloch 2 contracts, specifically for the use case that we saw sort of like emerging after the quote unquote DAO PTSD, venture clubs and sort of the venture financing a use case around smart contracts. We launched the LAO. We created sort of concepts around pegging to legal forms, membership agreements, LLCs, and kind of enunciating new ways to sort of like use the tech with law. From then, I always had this sort of Solidity bug and smart contract bug in my work. I wanted to sort of be a full-time Solidity, mixer. So I joined the Sushi Swap project at the behest of Joseph DeLong, also an ex-consensus guy. Worked with those folks and for the DAO for 2 years, working on AMMs and also sort of next-gen AMM designs, like factories to sort of build these things a la carte. A lot of really cool experimentation, learned a lot about smart contract development. But I always kind of saw like DAO design as something that needed to be a bit more nurtured, specifically, having companies and elaborating a little bit on what we were doing with Open Law Loud. So I was able to, through C Club and sort of the accelerator program there, put together a team, sourced some people I was already working with from LexDAO, sort of related effort, think tank / cooperative for crypto law. And we created the Kali contracts. And specifically what we wanted to do with Kali was create a sort of LAO factory. So can we allow people, with a click to select an LLC form, mint it as an NFT even, that's a very interesting concept that we could sort of play with on this chat. But then also set up an on-chain company and smart contract and do voting and sort of actually manage these things, no code and more automatically. So that's been sort of a design space that I've been focused on as a developer, as a sort of corporate lawyer. Like, can I actually gut all these like companies of their paperwork and replace them with code? How far can I go with DAO governance? What kind of contributions can sort of like corporate law, give to DAOs and DAO users? Limited liability wrappers is another like really cool design space that I think could be automated. And NFTs, like I said, are very useful ways to sort of containerize and actually do state secretary sort of services on chain. So that's a winding and sort of a rant-filled introduction to myself and sort of what I've been building and why I'm talking to you guys now. But bear with me; it's very late where I am, so not totally lucid. But
We
yeah,
love the
that's
like
sort of my introduction.
semi-lucid conversations. That's optimal,
Yeah,
honestly.
it's
Optimal
past
crypto
midnight.
convos.
Yeah, I'm trying to re-up.
Yeah. So you came from this background in law and you transitioned now into smart contract development for DAOs and have gone pretty deep in the governance space. I think from maybe an outsider's perspective, that seems like a pivot, but I think within crypto, we all know that is like a very seamless transition. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've ranted about this quite a bit recently on my favorite site now called X, but I see like lawyers and sort of Solidity developers, at least like for corporate governance, doing much the same exact thing. You're setting rules, you're setting permissions, and the smart contract is just like a way to actually establish, computers can also interact with this thing. Other users can interact with this thing, through other protocols, but also that like there's an immutable promise and guarantee. So like I've been sort of touting this idea of like immutability as like this like super upgrade to contract law because it's like a presumption, or I should say more so an assumption, that hasn't been possible until sort of blockchains and smart contracts came along. So I see, kind of building these things that I'm building right now, templates, if you will, of like smart contracts that hopefully can accomplish business objectives, organizational objectives, as just adding another sort of like tool to what I was like already doing as a lawyer. And like anything that's like left over that I feel like the Solidity can't service, I can sort of establish through, the legal layer, disclaimers and, the like are very hard to establish with code. So kind of what I think is the benefit here is that like I can do a little bit more finesse than a developer through code comments and a README file can do through like legal engineering. But I think they're very, very close in terms of what they're trying to accomplish for the users, vis-a-vis clients. So yeah, I think it's like a natural sort of fact that if there's like a new way to do business deals that like a business lawyer just kind of has to like adopt that new form.
Follow-up question to that. As a lawyer, you go through a ton of training on the existing legal system and how to navigate it and what agreements look like and like all these different things. Solidity engineers also go through the ringer, but in a different way and much less structured. So I'm curious when you think about like that transition from doing being a lawyer to being an engineer and considering this idea of like, the chain as the like legal enforcement sort of system. I'm curious what design principles you're pulling from your past into engineering.
Right. So I think a nice concept that a lot of lawyers learn in law school is the bundle of sticks analogy for property rights. So seeing property as a set of things, a collection of rights, and not necessarily just one thing. So a good example is, farmland. There's title, the deed to the actual like land itself. There can also be other rights that are given, such as like an easement. You're allowed to cross the farm, during these hours with your cows. And then I think kind of from that perspective, looking at code and kind of what people are trying to do with like tokens that have like extensions and other, similar extra rights is, it's just an application of that idea. You know, the bundle of sticks in a smart contract is, maybe the admin right, the mint permissions, depositor role, the owner of the contract even who can upgrade and reestablish balances and other sort of very interesting things. So I think the more into the name of the show, like the abstraction, like all this is you're just trying to record property rights and then also set conditions for the transfer of those rights. And then kind of at that abstract level, which I think law school actually does better job than the day-to-day grind of lawyering, is like teaching you how to think about like what the law and the legal system is actually trying to accomplish, for legal users who just want guarantees, so they can like, project and build a business and like have long-term relationships. Once you have that sort of abstract idea, once you just see Solidity or like a new sort of way to do that, you just like adopt it because you're a service provider for finality in a lot of ways. So if
Mm.
you see that, abstraction as like lawyers are, service finality, because the name of the game in a lot of cases that is that the legal system provides that. Once there's a new game in town, such as like smart contracts and blockchain settlement, and kind of what you're saying, Chase, that like the nodes, the validators, the consensus mechanism is the, judiciary, or it's like the way people are recording changes in property rights. Once you see that new game in town, it's like you do have to adopt that, or you're just priced out or excluded through sort of specialty from participating in that practices. So, uh, yeah, I think kind of like why I think what I do is interesting at this juncture is there's still not a perfect hybrid of these two systems, and because of that incongruity, there's like risks associated with pulling and using the jurisdiction of Ethereum or the smart contracts, if you will, that are not entirely contained with that code. So kind of actually understanding the full bundle of sticks on and off chain, presumptions of liability that, regardless of what you think about your, digital jurisdiction or your digital organization, what is the public thing? Other people who have ways to sort of use an attack vector through law, how do you anticipate what they're going to try to do? And then how can you assemble the property rights to your clients in the best way possible? The best way possible, for a lot of clients, and I would argue is like, moving to crypto, at least for, certain aspects of finance, like stablecoin settlement, is way better than sending wires. So I think we'll see sort of lawyers at least get sophisticated about the USDC, as cash consideration, for a safe round or something like that. This, adoption, I think is not only because it's like trendy, but I think, these lawyers will actually have to internalize, if they're good lawyers, the benefits of using sort of these technologies to do the deals a little bit faster or, service more international clients. So, yeah, it is kind of like I was saying before. If you abstract the role into finality service provider, then you have to kind of use new tools that compete with that. The legal system isn't the only way to service that as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's unpack the bundle of sticks a little bit and go a little deeper into Kali. So what are some of the on-chain primitives that you're working on, and how do you see people interacting with those sticks individually?
Great. Yeah. So I guess this is a great time to intro a little bit of my work on Kali. So, like I said, when I was working with Open Law and Metacartel and some of the other projects, a a few years back, we arrived on an extension of Moloch DAO that could allow you to exchange tokens and hold token in order to allow the investment community to help fund the dApp layer. And there was also kind of question of how do we fund things long term and not only rely on the grants model. So sort of that Moloch pattern, that evolution cycle towards having like on-chain companies or on-chain funds, I saw as a opportunity to streamline the creation of these, especially having sort of the legal layer. Like I've said, an LLC was used to peg the low and some of these early venture clubs, but there wasn't a streamlined way to deploy these kinds of organizations. So Kali was sort of built with that in mind, the use case of building a factory or sort of platform for labs. But then we sort of extended the simple modules of Moloch V3, Ball, which I worked on with Deacon and the DAO House team, where we wanted to basically allow arbitrary types of transactions that could be done from a very simple smart contract as a alternative to the Governor Bravo pattern. So that is a bit technical, but kind of the idea was, time lock and these other sort of modules, I do think are useful extensions for DAOs. But at the core, and a core that I wanted to explore with Kali specifically was, what could be a permissioned sort of, treasury, that's programmable. And then how could we also enable not only venture funding, but more like team or project, like, startup company types of use cases. So what we first built on Kali V1 was a factory to create DAO LLCs, what we'd call Kali codes, and to have a voting token, and to then also be able to do proposals in the typical sort of DAO execution flow. That was interesting as a challenge to sort of see, can we, through our UI, allow people to click wrap through LLC agreements, quick wrap through fundraising docs. That is a good challenge, I would say, as like a lawyer and a coder, to just like build an experience that feels like it's putting people properly in the driver's seat, but also, yeah, sure, these link quick wrap agreements. But basically,
Totally fine.
it's a way to allow users to quickly sign terms and other sort of access agreements so they can use software without like a huge cognitive overload. So usually a quick wrap agreement is a link. You're presumed to have read the link if you fill out a box or, make some other confirmation. So you click to sort of sign. That is a concept, that great, for sort of putting people on notice of like privacy or other, ways, they're going to interact with a, software. But it's also, I think, a very useful tool for, attaching legal intent to a MetaMask pop-up. So to unpack that a little bit, a MetaMask pop-up is, I think, really interesting from a legal perspective in that you're kind of seeing and allowing clients to like do their own finance, but then have a point of review. So a checkout experience to that. So kind of the extension to like just having wallet pop-ups is like legal pop-ups. So when you create Calico on, Kali V1 or created a wrapper through our other sort of service, wrapper.wtf, you're not only, getting the financial and sort of the on-chain transaction to review, but you're also having a checkout experience, the LLC agreements. So you're given sort of the PDF, and then you sort of do the click wrap. You sign both on our database, but also through the MetaMask transaction, through the actual data payload. So the data payload is, significant and kind of that. But yeah, I do want to back it up a little bit and, kind of explain that, we want to build a Lao factory, right? That sort of accomplish the simple objectives of, the Moloch DAO community to have like startups and ways to build, dApps, but also have, sort of, the blockchain as sort of source of truth. But, beyond that, I saw an opportunity to then also create ways to represent permission tokens. And permission tokens is, I guess, a design space that's more, flavored by securities laws. So trying to control transfers, trying to also have a little bit of granularity around who can actually, buy or hold a token, blacklist and the sort. That's a design space, ERC 1404. A couple other standards are trying to approach, but the Kali team, from my perspective, I saw already widely used token standards like the 1155 token standard. And then I also saw kind of what we're already trying to bring to the market with Falico, NFTs and sort of ways to have on-chain agreements, LLC docs even. And it occurred to me that, the ERC 1155 standard would be a very good opportunity to build that sort of legal inscription concept from Calico, but then also have arbitrary way to issue whatever kinds of shares, as NFTs, as fungibles, attaching sort of Kali in the governor style voting to those tokens. I think will also open up some good use cases on Kali to have stockholder votes, have boards of directors also execute transactions through our multi-sig concept. So we can go a little bit into how I've approached that as a contract developer. But the broad strokes of the Kali project is like we want to streamline basically crypto law.
So if I could play some of that back, it sounds like
Yeah.
the goal of Kali DAO is like we have this existing legal system with this existing rule set, and we have this new I don't know if we'll call it a legal system, but we have a system that is built on cryptography and harder foundations. We have with this new system the ability to sign transactions, and so far a lot of those transactions have been financial. But Kali is trying to mesh these two worlds together, where the signature that you're providing isn't some like fuzzy little DocuSign thing that has to go through the existing court system. It is a cryptographically enforced signature that can be tied into other smart contracts and other tokens that offer permissions. And so essentially you don't need to rely on the trust of the existing legal system. You can sign these legal agreements that may have, that they can have connections back to the existing legal system, but it also allows you to automatically enforce the agreement. Is that accurate?
That was a great summation. Oh, I wish I could get a transfer of that to the docs.
Appreciate that.
But yeah, I think that is kind of the basics. And like you said, there is the idea here that cryptographic proofs are kind of the strongest technology we have to prove somebody signed something, as well as the status of a deal or a contract. And, DAOs are sort of the living contract, who owns what in sort of this shared pot and this shared system. And yeah, the cryptographic proof of membership that you can get through, deploying a Kali DAO or, joining as a token holder, I think should be a lot more on the radar of corporate attorneys who want to, not have the technical as well as sort of the management risk of updating cap tables and making the correct, source of truth representation about, where a company's at. So I think it, does take a lot of that burden off.
So in your experience building for this space, there's already some basic foundational Legos like ERC 1155. What Lego pieces have you had to build to enable Kali? And just generally, where do you see, what else does the space need in order to standardize this connection between the legal system and the smart contract world?
So one of the things we had to do recently that I couldn't find an example for, so I had to develop in-house, was just a voting extension to 1155 tokens. So, OpenZeppelin and other libraries have helpfully, adopted some of the compound governor standard and made nice templates for ERC20 and 721 voting. You might be familiar with nouns and other sort of contract communities that have used those. But there wasn't really anything like that for the 1155 token. So doing sort of a light fork of, governor style checkpointing, having the delegation, functionality as well. But then through the context of the 1155 standard, I think does make it very interesting for sub DAOs, especially because each token can be its own sort of set of owners and set of stakeholders. So within a single contract, and a lot of projects are now touting the gas efficiency of single contract design like Ambient. Mm, Through that single contract, you can host almost an unlimited number of different stakeholders and classes, if you will. So it definitely explodes, I think, a little bit of the governance design space if you can sort of offer that just from a single address logic. I think it's very exciting. It can be overwhelming though to articulate how that might play out. My heuristic is just different classes of shareholders is a very natural way to use an 1155 voting token and still allowing them to have the ability to vote on chain. I think is very useful as well. So that's one example of something that we wanted to ship sort of in-house. We also didn't, when we were designing Kali D1, see any examples of a good single contract ERC20 DAO. There's, of course, like I said, the great patterns with Governor and sort of, Aragon as well with their modules. But we wanted to kind of go as far as we could for gas efficiency purposes to put as much of the token voting and execution functionality into a single contract. I think that does, pay forward pretty well to like convincing like more trad people to adopt this technology if it like is almost a 10x improvement and they're not having to pay more in blockchain transactions to do transfers than they might have to do through like Stripe or something like that. So for me, I'm like a little bit sensitive on that front. I think layer 2 is very helpful in reducing the burden of having these gas saving techniques and pushing as much into a single contract. You can have a little bit more flexibility there. But I think kind of, at least from, my background and sort of, speaking to the needs of more traditional people, they are quite conservative. And I think they are quite conservative, especially when it comes to experimental like financial technology, which does not have reversibility. So even though I think, speculators and people like ourselves, we have experimented and gotten to a comfort level with Ethereum and using a wallet. If there's, even a recent, news of a hack or other sort of like large mistake, these law firm clients will know about it and they will be very hesitant to shift a lot of their business logic or their assets into these things. So when I'm thinking like, what kind of pitches can I make? I need to at least be able to say with a straight face that like, this is very cheap or very efficient and is like almost a 10x improvement to running your startup or your deals, versus using paperwork and DocuSign. The contracts have to be, simple, very hack free, but also efficient. And then, kind of layer 2 idea, I do think it is promising, but we need a little bit more time on that, I would say, because kind of to that idea, if you're conservative, you'd be very conservative about like technology that is just getting adoption. I know within like a year, they'll probably watch these things play out a little bit more. Although I think, based and more, retail friendly chains, I think will be very interesting to see if that accelerates that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, on the note around like gas optimization, I'm curious when you think about, doing a ton of things in a single contract and trying to really optimize for gas efficiency. It feels like there are some trade-offs in terms of just like readability, how easily people can build on it and how flexible it is like after the fact. And so I'm curious how you think about the trade-offs there around gas optimization and also, making these things usable and easy to deploy and use.
That's a very fair point. So you can go too far into one direction, of course. You can overcorrect. And I think there is a trend in gas optimization to write so much logic in low level assembly or YOL that you can miss and might scare off a lot of people, I would say, that are reading that like their scan and realize they can't read a single line of it. So I think that's going too far in terms of gas optimization. The latest versions of Solidity, I think, are more generous. And you can do a lot of neat, sort of layer 1 single contracts that, still I think are fairly readable with, maybe putting a little bit of assembly onto something like, loops or, signature recovery. But I would say, overall, it is a balance and it is, I think, probably way more of a priority if you're a new project to sort of have very readable and, user-friendly contracts. But, all that being said, a point I try to make, often is that, money is obviously the most important factor for a lot of people using this because, they might be coming from, a speculative perspective or just from a cost saving perspective that like, if they're going to use this, they want to make sure that they're not spending a lot more than they're getting out. So I think, for people that are of interest, can read the code, it isn't so much of an ask that, certain portions are gas optimized or that we're not using a series of contracts. I actually think, using the time lock and several different addresses in conjunction introduces more complexity and risk. So I think, I would argue that like a simple single contract, like a voting ERC20 plus a way to tally and send votes is probably the most user friendly way to deploy sort of that version of a DAO. And that was also something that, I wanted to do, the keep contract, which as, I've sort of like hinted here is an 1155 voting token contract, but it also has a multi-sig as its like sort of core governance. What I wanted to do there, when I was studying, Gnosis Safe, the seed zero multi-sig pattern and several attempts at that, what I really wanted to do was, collapse as much as I could, into the single contract. So if you had DAOs grew out of the multi-sig, it wasn't so much of an ask or so much of complexity between how do the DAO tokens interact with like sort of the main vault, the main brand. But I also wanted to simplify the execute API and other things that I think Gnosis Safe has anticipated maybe too much, development around like safe transaction gas and these other sort of maybe more developer friendly but more complex parameters. I wanted a very simple, at least for my sake, readable version of a multi-sig contract that also had a way to have ownership through tokens. So that is the design challenge, but I think kind of doing it in a single contract allows people to like really simplify their auditing tasks. Because when I have to look at some of these governor contracts, even, these are battle tested. I still have to do a little bit of a pub crawl across the Etherscan to find all the contracts and like read them, check their ownership, make sure they all relate in a way that makes sense. So yeah, I think that increases the burden and the reliance on sort of UIs that might misreport information. And I think keeping it as simple at the contract level makes it a lot easier, to get started with these things, right?
Yeah.
So
Can you
there's
dig a little bit
one.
more? Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Can you dig a little more into how Keep works, the design of those
Mhm.
contracts, and the like? It sounds like account abstraction is part of the is baked into this. Can you just
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about that?
Right. So like I said, kind of like in our like user experience and what I've observed is that there's a lot more ease of use and adoption uptick around the signature style governance contracts. So collecting and pushing an array of signatures and then having the voting occur almost in a single transaction, right? So multi-sigs, are popular not only because they're simple, but I think it's also very user friendly to not have to pay gas to vote. So seeing that need, and also wanting to not scare away like more traditional people who don't want to, fold ether, use those things. We wanted to, have a multi-sig, but we also, like I said, wanted to have ownership as sort of a baked in concept. And designing Keep was for that use case, a multi-sig that can issue tokens for investment purposes. So more of like, a startup safe, fundraising tool. But then, also recognizing that like if you're building software, and you're using this technology, even if you're, a traditional startup or business, small team, building these things, the idea of governance tokens, will not go away because you need an incentive to prevent empire and forks and other attacks. If you're building Web3, using proprietary licenses is, tactical and I can appreciate sort of the business advantages there, but it also creates a sort of developer relations complication. I mean, we all read Twitter, right? We see sort of dramatic back and forth discussions on whether any crypto software should be totally open source and copyleft. So when you when you have these sort of factors in play, I think like having the ability to issue tokens, to your investors, but also to your community is like sort of a necessity if you like want to make it long term. So kind of looking at that, like sort of like next wave startup, next wave Ethereum startup, you know, business need. I wanted to have a multi-sig that could create and use tokens just like from sort of at the start and at deployment. So that was sort of the idea behind Keep. We use it for Kali DAO LLC itself. Eating our own dog food, of course, and it is kind of the advantage building sort of like crypto business software, crypto business, and then seeing if we can sort of generalize what we're trying to build for ourselves. It is a, business necessity, I would say, to like kind of control the smart contract layer for us because a position I've taken, in crypto law is basically that like if you're a crypto lawyer, you offer the most value to DAOs and to your clients if you can, carefully construct things from the contracts from the bottom up, including the smart contracts and what happens on the blockchain. So if there's like solutions, that we get from LexDAO client needs, how do you set up offshore LLCs, for example? These sort of opportunities to sort of deploy for ourselves, deploy for sort of projects in our orbit, and then upload to Kali DAO as sort of like part of our software offering, I think has been like a good sort of cycle. And that is what led us to build so the Keep contracts was, can we run our own internet native business? Can we provide, a multi-sig and this sort of smart contract on 1155 tokens that like would allow us to scale, as we wanted to. Yeah. And then it is natural to just build a factory pattern around that. So, that's
Sure.
more or less the story on like, Keep and Trevor B2 approach there. But I could talk a little bit about, sort of favoring 1155 and NFTs over ERC20s and sort of making that shift in the Kali contracts.
Well,
Okay.
before you jump into 1155, yeah, no, I'm hearing this theme, which I hear a lot with builders, which is the knowledge that there needs to be some new primitives in order to build the vision, to build toward the vision that you see, and kind of this willingness to just jump in and do it yourself. Like 1155V is a good example, just like a new voting standard off of 1155. I don't know, I just respect that, and I think it's really cool to see. But yeah, go ahead, talk a little bit about 1155.
No, for sure. I appreciate that. It is kind of just the case that like there's a lot of great open source efforts. Open Zeppelin, I think, will add these patterns soon enough. But if you're like building a business or trying to service certain use cases, you have to move at your own speed. And
Yeah.
developing that definitely is something that we've taken on for ourselves because I do think there's like practical things we can do with these smart contracts. Maybe and quickly even based on sort of our legal engineering hats. That leads me to so like let's talk a bit about that. So kind of what I was saying earlier on this sort of podcast was that I'd looked at several security token standards like 1404, and I did appreciate that like they added certain transfer controls to the ERC20 token standard. But the way they approached metadata, I thought was a little bit too complex in that like they had several different ways of storing like user and also issuer information, other several storage slots, mappings, upon mappings. And I just thought, when I was kind of looking at what being adopted by wallets, by NFT galleries, the 1155 token standard accomplishes two of the major goals with security tokenization and sort of like more company type tokens, where you want to have a way to contextualize the ownership, and, add like sort of stockholder information or sort of the company documentation to show these are sort of shares and what that actually means for the user. But you also want to have of course some level of fungibility and control and a way to actually have you know a way to issue shared. I needed sort of like a way to both have on-chain metadata, have it go up in a lot of places that then require sort of adoption of a new security token standard. That in and of itself would take like several years of VIP lobbying and sort of developer relations. In terms of front running that or doing an end run around that whole developer relations. I saw 1155 as a way to easily upload company data to a fungible token. And then the beauty of that design, of that token standard, is it's sort of like an endgame pattern of like you have the ability to just like have a single balance NFT. You also can have fungibility just expressed by having more owners and balance holders. So these things are like, so simple when we really think about it, and inevitable in a lot of ways. And I try to future proof and try to find inevitable patterns when I can. And 11.5 just stood out to me as like the multi-token standard that had been finalized but also adopted. This will probably be an endgame for a security token, patterned. So from that start, landing on sort of a way to actually do on-chain companies and have it relevant to platforms beyond our own, was how can we have on-chain governance that also makes sense? So that is the practical problem. You know, no other like sort of DAO or smart contract libraries that I saw had good permission token examples or whitelisted transfer patterns that I saw that would accomplish what we wanted to accomplish and were optimized. And kind of what we want to accomplish is not only plausibility as a factor, unlock versus locked transfers, global setting, but we also wanted the user specific whitelist, blacklist transferability control. So we have to, kind of build these ourselves if we don't see them in the wild in order to sort of, create, what ends up being, in my opinion, a company on that you can actually host on chain and have the sort of level of control over transfers and also what shows up to users as far as their like legal docs. And when I thought sort of development challenge, it's like, okay, we're going to build it on Kali and we're going to try to like make it a factory and sort of more of an open project so we can get more input. I was, lucky to get, some outside development help when I like kind of raised the flag that like, why is Gnosis Safe canonized as the only multi-sig pattern? It's like, that, that doesn't make sense to me in sort of biodiversity, in the applications. So as a developer, I was like, we should try to build something like this, but kind of take it in a direction that I thought might be a bit more exploratory, but also useful, at least for my company use cases. And that is incorporating almost Zodiac from out of the box with like ownership and sort of NFTs and the presumption of DAO governance through the governor tokens into a multi-sig. I thought kind of unite and sort of build this company template that I wanted to sort of finally ship. So that's very long-winded as well. Hopefully we can fix
It's all
some of that
good.
ranting, but it's broad.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of like I had to Frankenstein this thing because like there was no security token standard that worked for what I wanted
Well,
to do. Yeah.
it's funny. I'm hearing a lot of echoes to the earlier part of the conversation when you talked about taking these sort of like structured legal contracts and trying to put them on chain. And 1155 is the combination of structured data with like fungible tokens. So it's not surprising to me that sort of like nugget underneath Kali DAO kind of empowers everything else that you're doing. Is that a solid summary?
That's a solid summary. Yeah. And kind of like on the data point, what I, saw as important was the issuer should have the pen to update the issuance of shares. And we had to sort of like think, what's the most convenient way to actually control the URI, set the URI, update the URI, update, or transfer permissions rather than having external sort of control logic. Having the owner of that contract baked in as a multi-sig itself, like kind of felt like the most gas efficient way to accomplish that objective. So yeah, that's more or less the idea. I needed fungibility, a way to structure data, and also a little bit of control.
Yeah, I mean, more broadly, you mentioned this earlier and it feels like it's coming up again here now, which is basically just that like as much as you can build in like almost common sense permissions, the better. It does kind of feel like and you mentioned Zodiac, which I know there are a ton of different like use cases for Zodiac around permissioning, particularly for smart contracts. Um or I suppose like important protocol functions. And so I'm curious more broadly when you're thinking about like what it means to have these on-chain entities and what it means for them to be doing things that are meaningful on chain. How are you thinking about the delegation of permissions, both from, your own perspective as someone who has done a ton of work in smart contract development, but also from like the legal perspective?
Great questions. So permission is, you know, at its most basic, like a project manager, I think is a good example. And one of the coolest, I'd say, community modules on Kali DAO V1 was actually an extension called Project Manager, which allowed somebody to mint DAO voting tokens, sort of through an admin to basically give sweat equity or sort of compensation through equity or something like that. So I kind of see opportunities for having managers on chain through a lot of these permission roles and sort of toggles that can allow a little bit faster ways to reward people. For voting in of itself, you get rewarded with a secondary token on a limited to 5 or a fungible, through another DAO framework. Those sort of ways where you can like either give command to an agent, a person or an AI to sort of judge, the circumstances and whether they should call a function, or to sort of another smart contract that can do an on-chain check and also control sort of the next steps. The next steps that I think are kind of interesting here are investor sort of certifications being on chain. I've done some early POC work with having an accredited investor list as NFTs, and those are primitives that I think are nice because they allow you to recycle sort of the diligence process and publish that in a way that any platform can use it. So I think kind of open permission as a sort of like way to locate and sort of identify roles in an org on chain is like nice because as you guys are building with Metropolis, there's so much you can program around just having that open data source. Specifically NFTs, we're all a fan of those because of the visibility, but just having that like sort of predictability that you can create like a salary or other stream or compensation logic just because you can identify these things that I do think is exciting. So like I think lawyers, the most natural thing, and sort of output they've had is you trying to devise, security tokens, ways to have transfer restricted, shares on a blockchain. That's all great because you have the open data benefits and composability. But then how do you actually create roles on chain? How do you create like powers on chain? And permissions are like the most obvious, way to tie in the right to do something with the actual ability to do it. So wallets, can be allow listed. You can join a community or first NFT. They can be allow listed in the sense of being a signer on multi-sig. Those are really useful, I would say, and more useful if you have a way to identify them. So that was like also the design behind what we did with Keep was signer roles should be tokenized. You guys have also incorporated that into Metropolis for visibility purposes. And that is, kind of what I wish I would see with like Gnosis and other governance platforms is can you actually be more discreet about the bundle of sticks and sort of the rights and abilities of people and make it a little bit easier to digest and, build upon. So yeah, that's sort of like definitely a huge scratch space. I would say it's just like how fine-tuned and conditional can permissions be. And like sunsetting, I think is like the most obvious like use case that needs to be incorporated more into DAO governance, into multi-sigs. It's just like, it's a guarantee that this person loses the right after like 6 months and nobody has to argue or check the facts on that. The code will just like sunset the permission. And that those things need to be done more because it's like obviously a benefit and something you can't easily do in traditional or Web2 settings. So yeah, I definitely am bullish on that. Like I said,
Mhm.
scratch space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also interesting, like to your point around more open permissions via something like 1155s. You also then unlock these on-chain like markers as building blocks where like, you could see a world in which there's some sort of AMM that manages 1155s and you can do a ton of stuff with that. So I think it also unlocks a lot of design space there. But something that you mentioned before we wrap up that I want to make sure that we cover is this idea of what does it look like to delegate some of these powers to AI, which I think is like an interesting. I know you've been thinking a little bit on this, um, but I'm curious how you're thinking about the way that crypto and AI converge, particularly, in that type of context where you're talking about something like smart contract permissions, which are pretty, you don't want an AI to fuck that up.
Very true. And that is very, very much appreciated because, you know, we could have the best AI, but if it just reads something wrong or makes the wrong choice, we don't have legal recourse in most of these cases. It's not a person, it is like almost a whole nother, attack vector. But I would say the good news is that I think we can be fairly deterministic about some things AI can do, and we can also have ability to fact check what they want to do. That is sort of the design that I've been building with Nani. It's just sort of like Copilot for like running DAOs and also the on-chain companies. Um, Giving them sort of delegated, more specific, rights on chain, such as with Keep Design, we have specific tokens that map to functions that you can call on a keep. So like the mint function has a key that's an NFT. Giving those sort of keys to the AI, but then also having a sort of cosign on what it wants to do. And this is something that I think is like going to be the most practical way to have AI crypto agents is like the driverless car, check where the driver is still there and they can like sort of grab the wheel if something is starting to go wrong. There are people that want to do interesting things like Unibot, where you give a little bit of custody to the AI or their strategies, and we are considering that. But I think the most like natural and simplest benefit right now is that like AI is very good at ingesting a lot of information. A lot of DAOs have institutional knowledge that's spotty, and uniting that sort of the AI as like a built-in historian or fact or help desk, I think is like gonna be a benefit in obvious use case, and there's less risk of immutable harm. But then also having sort of what we're gonna demonstrate a bit more in the coming weeks, the AI Copilot for multi-sig, as well as for wallets, I think is going to be something that people would enjoy because getting suggestions, interesting on-chain interactions, such as like votes, proposals, those kinds of things, I think should be streamlined. There should also be way more streamlining around going from discussion to on-chain action, a proposal. It is, I think, kind of another sort of tax on DAOs that they have to have sort of technical operators, like certain people who just know how to use the software or know how to click on the app and do the thing right. It creates these sort of middlemen that like just shouldn't exist. And like we can try to fix those things like in terms of app building and like click button apps, but like inevitably you can't please everyone. So I think like AI is nice in that it is like a very like simplistic interface to like doing a lot of things, but it can also do these things automatically and make the jumps that are like correct and appropriate. One of the correct and appropriate, actions that we're trialing and we'll be able to publish a bit more about soon is going from a Discord discussion, having sort of emoji vote on what you should do, then having that posted as a proposal to be co-signed on the multi-sig app. We're not getting too crazy here, but I don't think we're trying to make any assumptions about the tech that aren't, accurate. I think AI is a great sort of enhancement and assistant to running a lot of these organizations, but I think it'll be a little bit of time before we give them full custody. Although with Nani, and something I can hint at, and a little bit of alpha here, is that we have created a Wyoming DAO LLC, and we want to demonstrate incrementally with sort of like taking the hands off the wheel with our multi-sig, how the AI is going to run the Nani project itself as the LLC manager, as sort of the algorithmic agent. So we'll try to do that and, hopefully not fail, but if we do fail, it'll be public and fun for everyone and people can sort of like join that experiment through, Kali. So I think that'll be very interesting. But yeah, definitely baby steps, but we're going to go a little bit further just for that specific goal.
Yeah, I really like the cosign paradigm. I think that makes a ton of sense. And also very intrigued to see, it obviously it it needs to it's in my mind, so I will say it out loud, which is like the version of this that goes so awry is that we give AI all the keys and then we have no recourse, which is of course the cosign paradigm helping, but also it's like a funny doomsday scenario, I think, where AI just runs everything and we, validators choose not to build blocks with AI signers. Like there's a very funny version of this that starts to play out.
I like that version. I would be very interested to read that short story. Maybe GPT-4 could help and turn that out really quickly. But yeah, I
Yes,
think
yes.
I like
cryptoeconomics and
that.
AI will get very, very weird because they'll be able to command people through incentives, and they'll be very, I think, intelligent about applying those incentives once they have fees. So hopefully we'll avoid
Yeah.
that nightmare scenario through sort of constitutional AI safeguards, almost like the Asimov law on chain, but can make no guarantees. If these really reach AGI, like who knows?
We will see.
We'll try.
Well, Ross, this was such a wonderful conversation. Before we wrap up, one final question for you, which is in the current landscape and all of the crazy shit that's happening, what is your hottest, spiciest bear market take, whether it's in the technical landscape in crypto or more broadly?
Ooh, my spiciest. Well, something I've been thinking about a lot recently is like maybe layer twos are not necessary at all, and we can do a lot more through clever signature schemes. And I think payment channels were kind of killed off too early, and we should take those. Yeah.
That is spicy.
Interesting. Yeah. Fuck the layer twos.
I mean, that might make a lot of these like experiments mad, but I think that's all in good faith. If I'm
Yeah.
wrong, it's like good for the science of it. We'll try.
It's all worth experimenting with. Well, Ross, this was so, so wonderful. Where can people learn more about you and all of the different things that you're building with Kali, and Nani, and yeah.
Yeah, so I think Twitter, I tend to lurk there way too much. So my handle is Zoros with a Z0R0ZZZ. I'm glad I got that right and didn't fumble that on a podcast. And then yeah, same handle minus two Z's on GitHub. You can see a lot of what I'm up to just through visiting those things and my sort of soup of association bio. But yeah, check out Nani at nani.oo, Nani.oo, Kali at kali.gg. You can see our blog as well as more of our recent deployments with Keep. Be on the lookout, like I said, for more updates with Nani and sort of Copilot from Multisig. And talk about that.
Ross, I appreciate you taking the time.
That was awesome. Yeah, thanks for hosting me and listening to my rants.
They were good rants, so we appreciate having you on.